Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready to begin another day with The Lottery Rose by Irene Hunt. Please find this on your Chromebook and read along with me. We're on page 44. I am Sister Mary Angela, she said in a greeting, and after shaking hands with the two women, she turned and took Georgie's hand. I am glad you're here, Georgie, both you and your rosebush. Judge O'Neill called to ask if we could find a good place for you to plant it, and I told him that you could choose any one of half a dozen places. We'll give the bush a sprinkle of water, and then you can put it outside your window for the night. Georgie ducked his head, in spite of Miss Sims' urging that he break this particular habit, and he could think of nothing to say. He was frightened and uneasy as he stood with the three women, especially when he heard Mrs. Sims say in a low voice, which she might have known that he could overhear, "He's not had much home life, sister. He's picked up some careless habits, bad table manners, and forgetfulness about taking a bath. He may once in a while say some words that will shock you." Sister Mary Angela laughed. "I am well acquainted with the way and the words of little boys from city streets, Mrs. Sims. I don't go into shock easily." When they were seated in the front parlor, she rang a bell on the nearby table, and a moment later a young nun came into the room. When Sister Mary Angela had introduced her to the two women, she led Georgie to the newcomer. "Sister Monica will take you to the dining room for a bite of lunch, Georgie, and then she will get one of the boys to show you around the playground. We'll call you before your friends leave." Georgie walked with Sister Monica down the hall to the dining room without speaking. She seemed to understand that he didn't want to talk, and after an attempt or two, she gave up trying to start a conversation. She smiled, though, as she placed a sandwich and a glass of milk before him. Later, she called a red-haired boy from the playground and put Georgie in his charge. "Georgie is our new boy, Timothy, the one Sister asked you to look after for a while. Will you show him around the playgrounds and the vegetable gardens? Maybe later he'd like to watch the baseball game the older boys are playing this afternoon." Sure, sister. I'll show him around." The boy called Timothy was pleasant. Some of the older boys were not. "Hello, ugly," one of them yelled at Georgie when Sister Monica was out of sight. Another one threw a pebble at the cast on Georgie's arms. "Who beat the out of you, ugly?" he asked. "Don't pay no attention to them," Timothy said, scowling. "They think they're big shots because they're 13. But wait and see how fast they get kicked off the team if Sister Monica hears them wisecracking." Georgie didn't answer. He was accustomed to the names being yelled at him, and when these kids learned that he couldn't read, then there would be other names. He knew them all, but he was too tired for caring. Anyway, he had caught a glimpse of the flower garden across the street, and without a word, he started across the playground towards it. Glimpse is a word that you might want to add to your vocabulary. He saw it. Glimpse is to see. A quick look. It was as beautiful as any picture in the book that he had loved, as bright and colorful as the garden in the dream that he'd had the afternoon in the palmetto grove. And this was real, neither a picture nor a dream, but a wide mass of hedges, trees, and flower beds that were almost within the reach of his hands, all of them in bloom and in every color Georgie could imagine. The flowers sent waves of fragrance across the street to Georgie, fragrance that made him dizzy with its sweetness. He hoped frantically that this was one of the places Sister Mary Angela had in mind. "Who does it belong to?" he asked Timothy, just above a whisper. "Her," Timothy answered, and pointed across the lane towards a young woman who was busy at a distant flower bed. She was a tall lady with two long braids of blonde hair that fell over her shoulder. "That's Mrs. Harper," Timothy continued. "She's pretty all right, but she don't like us much. If we happen to knock a ball over there, we have to ask one of the sisters to get it for us." Timothy paused and then decided to go on in spite of the fact that Georgie seemed to be paying little attention to what his guide was saying. "You see, she had a boy named Paul, and he was a nice kid. All of us liked it when his dad brought him over to play ball with us. But one day some man didn't stop at a red light, and Paul and his dad got killed. There's a grandfather that lives over there, and he's a real good guy. Sometimes he comes over and reads out loud to us, and there's a little boy that ain't right up here. Timothy put his forefinger to his temple. He's cute, though, and we'd like to go over, some of us would, and play with him. But no, a big fat no. Mrs. Harper would scalp us bald if we went over there. Georgie barely heard Timothy's words. The garden grew more beautiful with each passing moment, and he realized that here was where his rosebush must be planted. After all his worry and searching, he had found the perfect place for his prize. That evening, after Georgie had said goodbye to Mrs. Sims and the social worker, he went into the dining room with Timothy and sat beside him at one of the many round tables where a group of boys near his age ate together. There was a great deal of laughing among them, a cautious kicking of neighboring shins underneath the table. Occasionally a pellet of pressed bread crumbs was flying across the dishes straight into the face of someone directly opposite. Once one of the boys asked Georgie about the cast on his arm, but Sister Monica happened along about that time and gave the questioner a certain kind of look. That meant shut up, Timothy explained in a low voice after talking had again been resumed around the table. She told us this afternoon that we're not supposed to ask things about how another guy looks, but some of these clowns can't mind their own business. Timothy shrugged his shoulders, and Georgie was grateful that the boys ignored his cuts and bruises during the remainder of the meal. As twilight grew deeper, Timothy told Georgie that they must go into the chapel for something they called Vespers. Okay, I'd like for you to add Vespers to your vocab, and Vespers are evening prayers. It's just some guy singing while Sister Mary Angela plays the organ. And when that's over, we say a prayer or two afterwards, and we can raise the roof till bedtime. We don't always want to go, but we got to do it, no matter if we're Catholic or not. He grinned at Georgie in a friendly way. You meet me at the big door yonder. Yonder means kind of over there. When you hear a little bell, and we'll go in together. At the sound of the bell, however, Georgie slipped out of the doors. There wasn't another boy in sight, not a nun and not anyone to disturb him. He took his rosebush from under his window and hurried out to the curb. Where's he going? He's going across the street. Is he supposed to? Nope. What's going to happen to him? Okay, add your questions now. Where's Georgie going? Why does he want to go across the street? What does he think's going to happen across the street? Why does he think that garden across the street is the perfect place for his rosebush? He took his rosebush from under his window and hurried out to the curb where he could look across at the wonderful garden. After a long time, when the evening was almost night, he saw Sister Mary Angela coming towards him. She picked up a low stool from the lawn and seated herself upon it beside him. He thought maybe she'd be mad about the thing called Vespers, but she didn't say anything about it. I've been wanting to talk to you about your rosebush, Georgie, she said in a friendly voice. We'd better get it planted tomorrow, hadn't we? He wouldn't look at her. Where? He asked. How about just outside your room on the first floor? You'd be near it, and you could see it the last thing before you go to sleep and the first thing in the morning. Wouldn't that be a good place? No, Georgie answered. Where would you like it to plant it then? In the garden. You mean that garden? She asked, pointing across the street. Yes, we can't, Georgie. That is not our garden, and the lady who owns it is very strict about forbidding any of our boys to be over there. Sister Mary Angela stared over at the garden, and her face grew sober, as if she had many thoughts in her mind. You see, Georgie, she said. After a while, Mrs. Harper and her husband made that garden beautiful again after it had been neglected for a long time. It was something they both loved, and it helped them to forget the homesickness they felt for their home in New York and for their old friends. Now that her husband is dead, it reminds her of him, and she would never allow us to plant a strange flower or a bush in her garden. Georgie did not answer. Now let's think of a place over here, Sister Mary Angela continued. I'll be proud to have a lovely rose somewhere on our grounds, and to have you here so that you can take good care of it. Judge O'Neill will want to know how your bush is coming along. He may be able to drive out some day to see it. The right place is over there, Georgie muttered, his head still lowered. Why is Mrs. Harper's garden more of a right place than dozens of others, Georgie? It's like the garden in my book. My rosebush has to be there. Sister Mary Angela pressed a hand against her temple as if her head ached. It was a while before she spoke, but when she did, her voice was very firm. I have to tell you, Georgie, that the answer is no. I will do all I can to make you happy, but your rose bush can't be planted over there. Georgie raised his head and looked straight into her eyes. If you won't let me, I won't plant it anywhere. Then it will die, and after that, I will die. Sister Mary Angela sighed deeply as she got to her feet. We must go inside now, Georgie. It's time that you were in bed. We'll talk about this again tomorrow. She held out her hand and he drew away, and he walked silently beside her to the room that she had prepared for him. Okay, guys, let's add some facts about Georgie. Georgie is now at a new school. He sees a garden across the street. Georgie decides that that is the perfect place to plant his rose bush. However, there's a lady over there that won't allow any of the kids to come over or the rose bush to be planted, Mrs. Harper. Mrs. Harper owns the pretty garden. And Timothy is a little boy that is introduced to Georgie to kind of help him in his new place, to be a friend to Georgie. And Sister Mary Angela seems to be a really nice lady, and she's in charge of the school. And she tells Georgie, no, we can't plant your rose bush over there. I'd love to plant it anywhere here, and I'll help you. But Georgie says, if you won't let me plant it, it will die, and I will too. So he's being very stubborn about how he thinks about his rose bush. Okay, we're at the end of page 51. Go ahead and add one or two more facts of your own, please. And you might want to add some questions. What happens to the rose bush? Where does Georgie plant the rose bush? Remember, good readers always say, what is it I just learned that's new? And what is it that I want to know more about? And if you keep having that internal dialogue in your mind, it helps you whenever you get to new things that you read. So this is a strategy for high school. It's a strategy for now. It's a strategy for those content area classes, science, social studies, when you're taking notes over what you read. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.